It is always exciting to have a really full house. So thanks for your patience as we get everybody settled. Good evening, everybody. We have electricity, so we're off to a good start. You know, of all the wonderful and wide-ranging things that RAC does throughout the year, No Ordinary Person is my favorite show. And every year we celebrate the people who created it and sustained it as a, I think, unique Rappahannock tradition, let's see, for almost 3 decades now. So many of you in the audience could recite the show's origin story, I'm quite sure by now. So let's do it together. Who taught life stories workshops that give, yes, Julie Portman, the multi-talented Julie Portman, taught life stories workshops in the county and taught so many of us how to find our stories, how to shape our stories, and not anecdotes, but things that really reveal something about ourselves. Question number 2, whose idea was it to put them on stage? Joyce Abel, yes. Joyce, who, as many of you know, just celebrated her 101st birthday. I think she'll be at Sunday's show. But she was the one who said, these stories are marvelous. We should share them with the community. And she's really been the beating heart of No Ordinary Person, selecting and coaching stories for storytellers for 25 years. The last question might be a little trickier. What American author coined the term, the phrase, no ordinary person? Studs Terkel. Yes! I knew you could do it. Studs Terkel was a historian, writer, broadcaster, and he interviewed hundreds of people, some of them very famous, a lot of them not, that culminated in books like The Good War. And he decided, after that experience, that there is no such thing as an ordinary person. We all have rich lives and a lot of unique stories. So, having celebrated our history, let's talk about the present. We have another stellar lineup of storytellers, and they are going to transport you to Saudi Arabia, the Central African Republic, the byways of Western Europe, and Chattanooga, Tennessee. They will appear in the order that's in your program, so we're going to hear from Teresa Barger first, and then Larry Wohlers, then Edward and Paula Hughes, and Lynn Dolnick will be our backup, our cleanup batter this year. One special note about Lynn, we have had occasionally brought back a real gem of a story from a previous program. And I think many of you may remember Cliff Miller's touching story about his horse and Donald Chandler's wonderful, delightful tales about growing up in rural North Carolina. Well, tonight we have one of those treats. So Lynn is retelling a story that she first told here in 2012. So for all of you who didn't get to hear it, now's your chance. And for those of us who did, we are really looking forward to hearing it again. So afterwards, we're going to have a little talk back, and we invite you to stay for that. It'll take just a minute or two to rearrange the chairs, and then Ed Dolnick is going to facilitate a conversation that will give you a chance to ask questions as well. So a couple quick housekeeping things. There is no intermission in the show. There is a restroom back through the lobby and to the right. Exit if you need it in an emergency, straight back, and you can see the exit signs on the side there. One last program note I want to share. RAC is really delighted to be hosting a special free concert in honor and memory of our friend Charlie Tompkins. On the 27th of June, Linda Orfila and the bluegrass band Dark Hollow are performing 2 shows. The evening show is completely booked, but we have space in the afternoon matinee at 3 o'clock, and you can get information at rac.org. So I think that's it. I will say that concert will be the last event here in the theater before we start our very exciting renovations. But we will not be dark. We'll just be doing things in other locations. So keep up with us on the Look and Listen newsletter and find out where all those are going to be. So now it's time for you to do your job. You are the vessel, you are the container into which all these stories are going to pour. And I guarantee you, it is delightful work. So sit back and enjoy.
It was a hot and sunny day as I pulled myself out of the deep end to stand in line behind a dripping mess of kids to wait for the diving board. Actually, it was almost always a hot and sunny day. This was an oil camp in Saudi Arabia, summer after 7th grade, 1968. And as usual, almost all the kids were at the pool, kind of a parent-free zone. But we middle schoolers were no longer king of the hill because Aramco, the oil company, didn't run a high school. So all those kids had to go away to boarding school. They were back in the summer, as well as the college kids. We called them all returning students. And we 7th and 8th graders were in awe of them. Charlie Armstrong was a returning college student. He was tall, lean, and athletic, and he was the god of the diving board. He was also kind of nice to us little kids, and he gave some of us diving lessons. And when we had a diving lesson, we didn't have to stand in a long line for the board, and we didn't have to suffer those boys who just used their turn to run down the board and splash into a cannonball. I had my process. So go to the end of the board, turn around, then 1, 2, 3. That's my spot for the day. You get a visual. And then 1, 2, 3, right foot down, left knee up, both feet down, bounce to the highest height, and flip your hips. And then come down and do the whole thing again. Higher height, flip your hips again, and come down straight. Then do it again, double somersault, straight legs. Then do it again, higher height, double somersault, and a twist, straight legs, toes pointed, no splash. Over and over again, all summer long. I was the youngest of 6 kids. That summer, I had 1 sister and 2 brothers who were returning students. My oldest sister, Annie, went away to high school, then she went away to college, then she got married and came back to Arabia. She lived in a different camp called Abqaiq, but in the summers she sometimes spent some time with us in Dhahran, and she might be in the baby pool with my infant niece Elise, whom I adored. And sometimes my cool brother Timmy would come along to the pool with his tall friends. They worked in the Aramco film department because they were that cool. But being a cool boy in 1968, you had to be a little bit careful because if you went out into the towns, local towns, you might run into the Mutawa, religious police. The Mutawa had taken it upon themselves to fight beetleism, khanfasiyya. After khanfas, the word for the iridescent little bug, the beetle, khanfasiyya was the state of being like Paul or Ringo and having long hair. So if they saw an American boy with hippie-ish long hair, they might just nab him right there, take scissors and cut his hair right on the street. At the end of summer, all pool activity culminated in the intercamp swim meet. For one person in the audience, the Tri-District swim meet. It was a big deal. All of the community was there. And so now in the swimming events in my age cohort, I would probably be outflanked by the really wonderfully fast Adrienne Flink or Stephanie Ryder. So coming in second or third, that was fair for me. But diving, that was my thing. And coming in second was not my thing. At the end, after that, after the swim meet, half the kids in camp would leave, go back to school. And that year, all my siblings left me. I was home alone with my parents. My parents, they lived a wonderful expat life in Saudi Arabia, and it was filled with parties. I used to love to go to their cocktail parties, and I would navigate the sea of legs and listen to the adults, and mainly so that I could imitate them later for my parents, which, like all acts of mischief, was highly encouraged in my family. You know what I learned, though? I learned that the men had all the good conversations. They talked about the pipeline in Kaisuma, or the green revolution in agriculture, about the horrors of Gamal Abdel Nasser's nationalizations in Egypt. And you know, the women, they literally talked about babies and recipes, like the cliche. And it's so tedious. And then they would sometimes say, you know, I believe in girls' education because girls would have children that they needed to educate. And I thought, what? And then they have children they need to educate? When do women do anything? When do they contribute to the world? Do something interesting or something fun, like archaeology? I always adored my father. My father was a man who commanded a bit too much respect, but not from me. He loved being stood up to, and I obliged. He was at heart a kind of nerdy scientist engineer, but he made his way in the company also by soft skills. He learned really great Bedou Arabic, and he was trusted to negotiate with the first king, Abdulaziz ibn Saud. And he loved my mother. She grew up on a ranch in the baddest Badlands, which, in case you didn't know, they're in western North Dakota. And she had the manners of a girl who went to finishing school in Minneapolis. But she had the skills of the cowboys she grew up with. She was really a beautiful rodeo queen, but her event was really scary. She was a trick rider, and her killer trick was the death drag. I knew my mother was admirable, lovable, and adored. But that year, I thought, wasn't she maybe kind of a little bit boring like those women, and she didn't really do any tricks on horseback anymore, and maybe a little too glamorous and a little too embarrassingly sexy? That year, I grew allergic to her. I would tiptoe in the house like a burglar, hoping she didn't hear me and talk to me. I ate lunch in the banyan tree as much as possible. After school, I went to friends' houses, and I would do homework there and stay late. If there was an event at school and she came to it, I would hide. It was agony. I knew that freezing her out, giving her the silent treatment, ignoring her, avoiding her, was wrong. I knew it was a beastly thing to do. I knew it was a sin. I was not honoring my mother and father, but I could not for the life of me help it. Once my father came to me and he said, "Why don't you just sometime go up and give your mom a big hug and say, 'Mommy, I love you'?" Oh my God, I could never do that, never in a million years. I was governed by a force much stronger than I was. Luckily, 8th grade was filled with a lot of activities for me. I had student government, gymnastics, ballet, Arabic class, Girl Scouts. Yes, I was one of the nerdy ones who stayed in Girl Scouts. And on the weekends, I loved to go to Abcake, not just to avoid my mother, but also to help take care of baby Elise. I learned so many cool things, like, I don't know if you know, there's like liners you can put in a baby bottle that get the air out. And then, I learned about the chemicals you can mix together for the diaper pail, the 3 different ways to burp a baby. So many things. It was great. And I used to take the bus there. And it was about an hour from Dhahran to Abcake. And once I got on the bus, and the driver pulls off to the side, basically just in the desert. And I watch, he gets down from the bus with his prayer rug. So that's normal, prayer time, no big deal. So I watch from the window as he rolls out his rug. And then he readjusts his red and white headscarf, the shamagh. He readjusts it like this. And I see he has a mass of black curly hair that goes all the way down to his waist. What about Khanfasiyya? Beetleism, this is crazy. He's not allowed to do that. And so later, I asked my father about it, and he says, he laughs, first of all. He laughs. Like, he laughs? This is obviously very serious. And he said, no, long hair on a Bedou is different than long hair on an American. What? Absolutely not. That does not compute. Not for nerdy, witless me. At that time, most of the girls in our class were either horse crazy or boy crazy. And my friends and I thought both of those were really lame. In my family, we always had horses. My first horse was named Hamdani. It was given to my father by the Hamdani tribe. It conveniently rhymes with Mumdani, in case that's useful to you. And then every other year in the summer, we used to go back to the Badlands, and we would get up in the morning and round up the horses and then take a horse and ride into town and hitch the horse to the hitching post. So we really had no reason to be horse crazy. And boys, if mooning over them is what it meant to become a woman, as they said in Girl Scouts, who needed that? Let's just forget about the woman thing. And it wasn't just boys we knew. Girls would invite me to their house to see their Beatles posters. And then they would say, which Beatle are you in love with? Oh, please. There's that yucky sexual thing. And then, how unfeminist that you would declare your love for a guy you've never met and who really cared not a thing for any dweeby 13-year-old girl. In PE, we had modules. 1 month volleyball, 1 month track. I don't know if they had that in America. And then in the spring, we had a swimming module. And this is after months of freezing my mother out and feeling really cut up about it. That swimming class, I still actually remember some of the techniques. I still use some of the techniques that I learned in that class. So at the end of the module, we had a swim meet. And it was just a last day of class thing, very simple, just the 8th graders. So my first dive, of course we had swimming and then diving. In my first dive, I had my back to the pool. It was an inward dive. And as I descended, a huge gasp went up around the pool. And apparently I had come down a nanometer from the end of the board. And they thought I was going to land directly on my head and die. It was fabulous. Do you know how many points that's worth? It's incredible. The next dive I got up is outward facing. I'm looking out, and on a platform, on a folding chair, is one spectator, my mother. How did she know? No one knew. I mean, no one's parent was there. Well, I dove really well that day. And after it was over, I did not go up to her and give her a hug. But you know, that force that controlled me just started to loosen up as I went through that spring. And I think I got caught up in all the emotions of my last year in Arabia, of the prospect of all my friends going off to boarding school in Europe and America, all over, dispersed, of that nostalgia in advance that always accompanies the end of an era in life. And for me, it would be different because in the coming year, my parents were going to retire and move back to California. So for me, it was more of a final parting, and I would never be an exalted returning student. As I went through those last months and weeks, savoring my last moments in Saudi Arabia, I just became more and more of a normal person, kind of leaving behind my reluctance to embrace the woman thing. And by the time I was ready to go to boarding school, the end of summer, telling my mother I loved her just wasn't an issue. It was just normal. In my second year of boarding school, it was decided that I would stay in the same school. On my February birthday, I got a call from my father. He sounded terrible, stricken and subdued. My mother had ovarian cancer, inoperable. I got off the phone, and I thought, I have to go see them. I had no money. I couldn't buy a plane ticket. So I borrowed $10 from a friend. I got on a Greyhound bus with permission of the nuns, and I sat for 15 hours to San Diego. When I got there, I put a dime in the payphone. Hi, Daddy, I'm here. That week, we went to see my mother at the hospital during the days. At night, I would fix my father a simple supper. We'd eat in this dark house, too quiet. And at the end of the week, he got me a plane ticket, and he gave me an envelope. In my seat, I opened the envelope, and in it was a ring. It was a tourmaline with 6 tiny diamonds on it, one for each child. It was the ring he had given my mother when I was born, the 6th child. And there was a note, and the note said, "You are reverent of God and irreverent of people." The biggest compliment I could ever get from my father. She wanted to live till Christmas, and she died Christmas Day. I had never been so grateful to have resolved the compulsion that kept me from her. I would now know fully what it is like when the object of intense love dies and you are left with all that love loose in the world with nowhere to go. The full pain of human grief. And now I also know the pleasure of talking recipes and babies, whom I've always loved. Yes, I want to see all the pictures of your grandkids, and really please keep the cooking tips coming because I have so much to learn. Thank you.
Good evening. Tonight, I want to take you back a mere 14 years to 2 days after Christmas 2012. It was 4 a.m. while many Americans were recovering from their holiday feasts and settling into post-Christmas routines. My deputy, Brennan Gilmore, and I were driving through the nearly deserted streets of Bangui, the capital of the Central African Republic. Holiday lights still twinkled along the avenues, an eerie sense of normality that clashed with everything that we were feeling. We were bleary-eyed, having slept little in the last couple of days, and knowing that for at least the next 24 hours, there would be no sleep. We were headed for the American Embassy, where I had served as U.S. ambassador for the past 2.5 years. That was about to change abruptly. The night before, Washington had called. We were not safe. We needed to get out immediately. Ahead of us on the road, a convoy of French armored vehicles stopped us. Flown in overnight, they were headed for the French embassy, where mob violence the day before had set off alarm bells in international capitals. Back at our own embassy, our staff of 10 Americans and 50 Central Africans would soon be preparing for an emergency evacuation. Thousands of miles away, meanwhile, my wife, Anne, was spending a pretty miserable Christmas with our kids. Just a week earlier, I had waved to her at the airport and said, "Don't worry, things will calm down. I'll be joining you soon." Now she had to endure the strange sense of powerlessness, of not knowing what was happening or even if I was safe. Even 35 years of diplomatic postings doesn't prepare you for that. But let's back up. You need a little context, a little history. A former French colony, the Central African Republic, is an immense country, 6 times the size of Virginia, but with only 5 million inhabitants. In the local language, it is called Bay Africa, which is literally the heart of Africa, because it sits at the geographic center of the continent. Though landlocked and isolated, in good times it can be a pretty magical place, a place where elephants, gorillas, and other wildlife still roam freely in rainforests and savannas. But these were not good times. Central Africans have the misfortune of living in what we diplomats call a bad neighborhood, surrounded by failing violent states, the Congo, the 2 Sudans, Chad, places where battle-hardened mercenaries are cheaper to hire than taxi drivers. And a few weeks earlier, a murky new alliance of such fighters had crossed the border from Sudan and self-proclaimed themselves in rebellion. They quickly overwhelmed the small Central African army. Town after town fell. By Christmas, they were camped just north of the capital. The government was disintegrating. The city was panicking. State radio poured fuel on the fire, warning that radical Islamists were coming to slaughter Bangui mostly Christian population. In Washington, my superiors were pretty worried too. Our embassy had no Marines, and there were no American forces within thousands of miles. So the night before, I joined an emergency task force call with Washington. What should we do? Is there still work we can do? Or was it time to get out? Unspoken, but overhanging everything, was a recent tragedy. Just 2 months earlier, our ambassador in Libya, Chris Stevens, had been killed in Benghazi. Critics called it senseless, but that misunderstands diplomacy. Diplomats don't seek out risk, but we accept that some degree of it does come with the profession. So I had argued for keeping the embassy open, albeit with a skeletal staff. The Rebel Alliance leadership, I explained, was not anti-American and seemed open to listening to us. An American diplomatic presence working in close conjunction with fellow international missions could help prevent bloodshed, possibly broker a ceasefire. So diplomacy, I believe, still had a chance to prevent a downward spiral into further chaos. But Washington had a political problem. Republicans in Congress had seized on Stevens' death in Benghazi to pummel the Obama administration and then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in particular in a relentless series of hearings. So my bosses were in no mood to take on any more risk. The decision was made, we had to go now. Closing an embassy, however, is not quite like locking your front door when you leave on vacation. There were files to destroy, equipment to disable, a steel communications vault to be welded shut, and most importantly, American citizens to be tracked down and offered safe passage. But first, we had to figure out exactly how to leave. Commercial flights had stopped. The roads were controlled by rebel fighters. At one point, we even considered floating down the Ubangi River to the nearby Republic of Congo, but that would have meant days floating through ungoverned territory. Not ideal. So out of other options, Washington ordered a U.S. Air Force base in Italy to assemble flight crews and aircraft, and hardest of all, a viable flight plan. Because to reach us, those planes would need emergency overflight clearances from 6 different African countries. A daunting task at any time, doing it in a matter of hours, even more so. When would the planes arrive? Where would they take us? We had no idea. But we didn't have time to think about that. We were working through our emergency shutdown checklist. Yes, every embassy has one of those, just in case. And trying to determine how to reach the airport safely. The regular police had melted away, replaced by unpredictable ethnic militias. Meanwhile, Brennan, a veteran of other evacuations, had assembled a team to track down American citizens scattered across the city. An especially difficult task because few Americans abroad bother to register with their embassy. Think about that the next time you travel. Around midday, I received a call I had been expecting and dreading. President Bozizé wanted to see me immediately. Brennan was uneasy. Our departure was a signal to the world that Bozizé was losing control. There was no telling how he might react. But refusing to go itself would be dangerous. So my driver, Joe, and we climbed into the ambassador's car. We placed the American flags on the hood because sometimes a diplomat's best protection is just to be visible, and headed for the palace. The president was furious and pretty scared. Why was I leaving? Why wasn't the U.S. doing something to stop the invasion? Round and round we went. The conversation dragged on for a couple hours, but in the end, he reluctantly let me go. Night was falling quickly as I headed back to the embassy. And you know, it's a funny thing about twilight on the equator. There is virtually none. The darkness just suddenly falls on you like a heavy blanket. I walked in the door to bad news. The planes from Italy had not received their overflight clearances. In mid-flight, they had turned around. So for a few hours, it looked as if we might be stranded. But we kept working. Did we eat? I think so. I honestly can't remember. Then, good news. The Pentagon discovered that it had 2 contract transport planes sitting in nearby Uganda. We were back on. We called our American citizens to hurry to the embassy. Only 1 suitcase each, they were told. And finally, at 10 p.m., our convoy moved through deserted streets to an equally deserted airport. And at 2 in the morning, we lifted off. It took another week before Anna and I could finally hold each other, hugs we badly needed, in part because January was bitterly cold and we didn't have winter coats. The suitcase I had hastily packed for her that night, she dryly explained, had all the wrong clothes. So for the next few weeks, I put together a mini embassy in exile, while after hours, Anna and I rebuilt our wardrobes and looked for some place to live. A pro tip on that one, if you ever have to furnish an entire apartment in one day, not just the furniture, but the sheets and the cooking and the salt and pepper shakers, IKEA is your one-stop destination. Meanwhile, the U.S. Embassy in the Central African Republic had closed, except it hadn't really, because there remained one enormous problem: our local staff. Every American embassy depends heavily on local staff, drivers, technicians, secretaries, but also political advisors and consular assistants, people who know the country far better than any diplomat ever could. Many of our staff in Bangui had worked for the embassy for decades, and they were extraordinary professionals. There was Jean-Baptiste, our consular expert, who had helped me free an American who was accused of spying. There was Philippe, my political assistant, whose office was my first stop every single morning. And there was Guy Amin, our public affairs specialist, whose infectious laugh had endeared her to a generation of local students who used our library. That day, we had needed them more than ever. The logistics of the closure simply couldn't have been done without them. That evening, they drove our convoy to the airport and watched as we flew away. That might surprise people who watched on TV the Kabul evacuation in 2021. But massive airlifts are the exception. In most emergencies, American staff leave while the local staff remain. Partly that's a matter of simple capacity. The State Department doesn't have the aircraft. But evacuating employees also raises complicated questions. Do you take their families? Who counts as family? Where would they live? How would they return? So the local staff stayed. Not abandoned exactly. We kept paying their salaries. We ensured that the lights in the embassy stayed on. And every day I spoke with Guy Amin and Philippe by phone. But there was one thing we couldn't promise them: their safety if things turned ugly, as they soon did. 3 months after we left, a fragile peace deal collapsed. The president fled in a small plane. The rebel army swept into town, and then the looting began. Somehow the phones were still working, so I could talk with them. And my people described armed looters appearing at their door, taking first their cars, then their furniture, later their bathtubs, and eventually their homes. Somehow there was always something left to steal. For months, as that chaos grew, I functioned as a reluctant ambassador in exile, calling the new government, their leadership, urging them to stop the pillaging, gathering intelligence, coordinating with other capitals and diplomats, drafting policy recommendations for Washington. The days were full and deeply, deeply frustrating. Central Africans didn't just need the world to know what was happening. They needed someone to act. And pressure was finally building at the United Nations to deploy a peacekeeping force. I, of course, agreed strongly. But my superiors were reluctant. Peacekeeping missions are costly, after all, and Washington had no appetite for a big new bill. Let the African continent figure this one out, I was told. But I couldn't keep just on reporting on a tragedy unfolding among people I knew personally. So 9 months after closing the embassy, I resigned. It was time to move on, I told myself. Moving on, however, proved harder than I expected. My job felt unfinished, a sense of failure gnawed at me. Anne and I held one last video call with the staff in Bangui. We talked about their lives. Thankfully, none had been killed, although they had lost relatives. We managed some lighthearted banter, and I told them that I would return someday, although I had no idea when or how. In the months that followed, however, the country never really left me. I kept finding myself on the phone with contacts in Bangui. I advised nonprofits working on refugee issues on what to do. I co-wrote an academic book on the country, Making Sense of the CAR, we called it, as if that were even possible. And then 6 months later, in March 2014, the phone rang. It was New York. The Security Council had approved a peacekeeping mission, 10,000 people. They knew peacekeeping logistics. They knew nothing about the CAR. Would I help? The timing couldn't have been worse. Anne and I had just bought a house in Rappahannock County. We were about to move in. We were finally moving on. But there was no doubt in my mind I had to go. 3 weeks later, I landed in Bangui. I reported to a new UN peacekeeping compound buzzing with activity and began grappling with the challenges of dealing with what the CAR had become, a truly failed state. But first, I had unfinished business. I grabbed a car and I headed to the embassy. I was no longer the ambassador nor even an American diplomat, but I was the first friendly American face the staff had seen in 12 months. The guards opened the gates and waved me through, and everything looked bizarrely normal. The embassy cars sat in their usual spots, clean and ready to go. Flowers bloomed alongside the swept sidewalk. Inside, everything was in its place. Even in my old office, my pens and pictures that I left there sat neatly arranged. The embassy had never really closed, not really. I stopped outside the auditorium where the staff had gathered to meet me. For all those months, without knowing when or even if an American diplomat would return, surrounded every day by violence and chaos, they had kept coming to work. They had kept everything running. By their sheer presence, they had protected our embassy from the pillaging and chaos that had hit most of the rest of the city. That was loyalty. These people were heroes, real heroes. Ones most Americans would never know about, nor could they comprehend. I walked into the auditorium. Guillemine met me with a radiant smile on her face. Bon retour, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, she said. I had returned.
It started as a crazy idea and pretty much stayed that way. But by my calculations, at our age, we had 20 summers left. So if we were going to do something reckless, something crazy, we better do it soon.
So we were just coming out of the pandemic, and I had just retired. And we decided that we needed to do something to mark the beginning of this new phase of life, something disruptive, something that would take us out of our comfort zone. And that's how we decided to walk from Canterbury, England, to Rome, Italy, along the Via Francigena, which is an old pilgrimage route that was first recorded in 940 Common Era. So at first the numbers can seem quite daunting. The Via Francigena is 1,500 miles. It's like walking from Boston to Miami. We would be walking for 116 days, averaging 10 to 20 miles a day. We had decided that we would do it alone, solo, that is, no guides. We wouldn't join a pilgrimage group, walking from England across France, down into Switzerland, over the Alps at the St. Bernard Pass, into Italy, and then down to Rome. So after 2 years of planning, we started walking. The starting point was Canterbury Cathedral in Canterbury, England. We went up to the ticket booth to buy a ticket to go see the cathedral. The docent looked at us and said, we had backpacks and walking sticks, and he said, "Oh, so where are you off to?" And we said, "Well, we're kind of walking from Canterbury to Rome." And he said, "Well, pilgrims are free. Have an uplifting journey." And so we joined this subculture of long-distance walkers, people that measure their achievement by the number of blisters they get or the number of hours they walked rather than their heart rate or their speed. Now, mind you, we weren't pilgrims, although there are a lot of walkers along the Via Francigena that do it to collect the indulgence that the church bestows when you reach St. Peter's Square. We didn't do it to see monuments or visit cathedrals. We didn't do it to meet people. Frankly, we didn't know how to do it. We didn't know what to expect. And even more importantly, we really didn't know why we were doing it. I guess we hope to find out why by actually walking the Via.
So you might call us accidental tourists. We set out on 116 days of walking together. We immediately started learning things about ourselves and each other, not any closer to answering the question of why. we quickly developed a deep dependency. And you might think that odd for a couple who had been married more than 40 years. We had done the richer and poorer, the sickness and in health, but this was different. This was a reciprocal relationship like found in nature, where two organisms rely on each other for survival. I may be exaggerating a little bit. But for example, like the zebra and the wildebeest. So Paula's a zebra. I have excellent eyesight and memory, and I eat the top of the grass stalk. Edward, the wildebeest, he has good sense of smell and hearing, and eats the bottom of the stalk of grass. The zebra looks down, the wildebeest looks up. So, for example, I could point out interesting things that I was encountering on the ground, like, ooh, Edward, look, there's a poppy growing through the asphalt. And isn't that bug the same one we saw 2 weeks ago? And the wildebeest, ever kind but cautious, would say, yes, but you're in the middle of the road and there are cars coming. We were vulnerable. We were silly, we were dumb, but we were necessarily playful. Our typical day, well, each morning would begin with an elaborate ceremony of applying ointments and lotions. Our feet were wrapped like prize fighters' hands. All this in the hopes of avoiding a blister or bruise and maybe saving a toenail or two. But at the end of the day, when the shoes and the socks were removed, well, Edward's feet, they looked like hands. They looked like beautiful hands that play the piano. My feet, they looked like they had gone a couple of rounds with Sonny Liston, the fighter. Meals were often uneven, and if they were memorable, it was for all the wrong reasons. Lunch was typically a sandwich, a piece of fruit, which we ate on a log or a stone wall or leaning against a slope. Dinner could be problematic. One night, we stayed at a large livestock operation. The flies and the smells met us first, and our host explained that he didn't provide food, but there would be a fish truck that was coming by, and we could buy raw fish, and he would allow us to use his hot plate in the barn. So we were clever enough to ask for a pat of butter and a pan. It was absolutely delicious. We ate in a quiet corner in the barn on a haystack. It was our own version of the French bistro. Our evening routine included publishing a summary of our day. Our children, 2 of which are here, questioned our judgment and sanity. They had reason. Self-guided, never done it before, walking solo. So it was like our nightly entertainment to publish a blog for our friends and family. The responses we received were incredible, many from people in this audience, of support and encouragement. But let me tell you what the 2 most popular questions from the audience. Number one was, did you fight? No, we didn't. Now, don't get me wrong. I can be provoked into an argument with the smallest of a slight, but it didn't happen. And the second was, did you lose weight? Well, of course, but I think that Ozempic would be easier and probably faster.
So in the course of our walk, we would often ask each other, maybe accusingly, so whose idea was this? But this was not a competition. We had agreed ahead of time that should we want to, we could take a taxi or a bus or a train to the next destination. And frankly, if we wanted to just give it up, we would go to the nearest airport and fly back to the States. But we didn't. Instead, we decided to use a luggage forwarding service to take our luggage to the next destination as a bow to comfort. But we carried a 10 to 15 pound pack on our backs with 3 liters of water, lunch, several oranges, change of clothing, rain gear, various hats and caps, the battery packs, and first aid kit that was always very important.
Yeah.
In the course of our walk, we consumed 184 gallons of water. We ate 216 oranges. We wore through 4 pairs of walking shoes, lost 3 pairs of walking sticks, and countless hats and caps. We also climbed 132,000 feet of elevation gain, which is the equivalent of climbing Mount Everest 4.5 times. We used GPS to navigate. It often didn't work. Fortunately, Zebra here has an uncanny sense of direction and would always find a path, even if it wasn't to the intended destination. And at the end of the day, our achievement was that we could get to do it again the next day. Our motto became, start walking and keep on walking.
So now you know that we're not traveling along on a flying carpet propelled by spiritual rapture. We're walking 8 to 10 hours a day, every day, all day, rarely seeing any other walkers. The day would start with a discussion of current events, random thoughts, observations. As the miles ticked by, light banter would take over, kind of like blah, blah, blah. But our pace would slow, our gait would become awkward and unreliable. I was frequently reminded of a slogan I had seen in a tattoo salon that said, "You bet it hurts." With added distance and elevation gain, silence became our conversation. Then we would resort to the ear pods. We shared a pair so that we could listen to books and music simultaneously. My suggestion for the Barbra Streisand biography was rejected. Wildebeest's suggestion for Ode to Joy was rejected. But music can be very helpful. Bill Withers can get you through any elevation gain. And if that doesn't work, a boost can be had by some sad songs from the 70s. Remarkably, at the end of the day, the overwhelming memory would be walking for hours in endless fields of flowering phlox. We would pick up stray peas and asparagus on the ground that had been left by the harvesters who were working our same lanes. But one night, our nightly accommodations, I'm going to tell you about one night. Our nightly accommodations, they ran the gamut. From 1 or 2 star hotels, a family farmhouse. One night, we were in a windmill in a raging storm. Another, we were in a geodesic dome with a barking dog. But for some reason, one of my favorite was a child's bedroom with a giant poster of Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs smiling down on us in our twin beds. It was absurdly romantic.
Some of our most memorable experiences came about when we got lost or ran into something totally unexpected. One time, after a very long, hot day, we'd been walking for about 10 hours. The sun was about to set. GPS had stopped working, and I figured that we were between 6 and 7 miles from our ultimate destination. So what to do? Sun is setting, nobody in sight. Hitchhike. So we stuck out our arthritic thumbs, hoping that a car would show up. And sure enough, miraculously, Mario shows up in an old Fiat with St. Jude, the patron saint of lost causes, dangling from his mirror. But surprisingly, he rolls down his window. They weren't automatic. He rolled down the window and he says, "Where can I take you?" And so we pile into the car, and he takes us to our destination, even though it was in the opposite direction from where he was heading. On another occasion, we were walking in driving rain in a deeply rutted, mudded path with impenetrable sides. The water was lapping up against our knees, and we said, we got to turn back. So we turn around, but before we could go any further, we hear the rumble of an engine, and this tractor appears. And the driver lowers the front loader, and he motions with his chin. And we said, us in there? And so we get in with the fertilizer and the animal feed, and he drives us for the next 1.5 miles, parting the waters until he deposits us on dry land 1.5 miles further. He tips his cap and goes on his way. Not a word was spoken. On another occasion, we were trying to find the beginning path for the day in a medieval town, narrow streets, couldn't find it at all. So we saw a church, and there was a priest sitting in front of the church. So we go up to him. Where's the Via Francigena? He says, I can tell you. But first you have to help me solve a problem. What are we going to help you solve? World peace? I mean, hunger? What are you? We go into the church, and there are 2 pigeons fluttering about. For the next half hour, as we helped him shoo away the pigeons, he gives us a detailed explanation of everything in the church. He shows us the well where Jews took refuge during World War II when the town was occupied by Germans. Finally, he shows us the fresco of 2 pilgrims walking along the Via Francigena. This is where the path begins. It was a 12th century fresco. The church had been built on the Via Francigena. So as we were parting, he leaned into us and he says, remember, everything has meaning. We carried that with us for the rest of our walk. What we wanted to ask him is, okay, explain what we're doing. But we refrained. Because usually the best way of encountering a challenge is to just not knowing what you could expect to happen.
So the guidebooks and the testimonials, they weren't always accurate. And in fact, if we had known the challenges that awaited us, we probably wouldn't have done it, because we would have come to the conclusion that we couldn't do it. Like, for example, walking on a 6-inch path, 45-degree slope with a 1,000-foot drop, which the testimonial said was a pleasant walk through an alpine grove. The description of the final climb over the Alps at the St. Bernard Pass was described as moderate but steady. It was relentless. Relentless. We arrived in a thundering hailstorm. But that's another variable that's not mentioned very often, and that is weather. The Apennine trails, they can turn into biblical mud with very little rain. I'll give you an example. Wildebeest is gliding up this mountain of mud and encouraging Zebra. Zebra, full of confidence, starts, but then loses focus, and so I start hurling down the mountain, and like a human toboggan. So we walk into town, filthy, conspicuous, but unbroken. There were lighter moments, like the time we arrived in Luzerne on Lake Geneva into a luxury hotel. We clomped into the marble lobby in a cloud of dust, like early explorers. The hotel guests looked at us like they were a New Yorker cartoon. The bellman took our bags and held them like they were ripe wheels of camembert. And I, of course, go over to the concierge. I ask him a question, which I'm sure he's heard a million times, which was, "Where's the nearest laundromat?" It was at a gas station. The washer and the dryer were right next to the diesel pump. So after 16 weeks, our crazy idea remained crazy. But when we arrived in Rome, standing in front of St. Peter's Cathedral, we were humbled by the dome and the colonnade that welcomed us. Why did it feel so emotional? We had not been guided by a thesis. We had slayed no demons. We had appeased no angels. We had confessed no sins. It had just been a long walk with my dear friend the wildebeest. And yet, here we were overwhelmed with joy, with relief, and disbelief.
So, why did we do it? The fact is that we still don't know, but perhaps it's best explained by our last entry into the journal that we wrote as we were flying back home. If we had expected some momentous achievement, or the revelation of the secret of the life in the universe and everything, we would have been disappointed. Instead, we found that life is fulfilling when just putting one foot ahead of the other. It turns out we only need each other.
When I was in college, Patty Hearst was kidnapped. You're an old enough crowd, you may remember. It was big news at the time. Daughter of a media mogul kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army. Ransom pictures with a knife at her throat. For my extended family, this wasn't just a titillating news story. We were sufficiently prominent that we kind of took it personally. My particular branch was out of the limelight down in Tennessee, so for us it was a bit more abstract. What self-respecting kidnapper would venture all the way to the boondocks? But it was on our minds. We talked about it a fair bit at the dinner table. My mother's opinions were very clear. You can't even think about paying a ransom or talking to the kidnappers, she said. I thought, well, wait. Suppose this was me we're talking about. You've seen the pictures. My life is in danger. No, she said, no way. You can't talk to the kidnappers. It only encourages them to kidnap more. But Mother, there isn't a kidnappers union. These are specific bad guys who have your child, me. It's the price you have to pay, she said. Just like sending your kids into war, there's a risk they'll be killed, and you have to accept it for the greater good. Not exactly that she-bear, don't touch my kid or I'll kill you kind of love, was it? The thing is, she meant it. I could give you lots of examples. Duty first, citizenship above family, rationality above feelings. That's the way it was. Now, I'd always known she was that way and that she was different from other mothers. That part wasn't a surprise to me. Not everyone's mother would say, well, the bad guys have her now. She's gone. Better just accept it and move on. But when I had a kid of my own, I felt such a fierce love that I just couldn't make sense of the way my mother had mothered. It really threw me for a loop. It even sent me into therapy. So, how did my mother come to feel that way? That duty superseded her children? And did she really feel it? Actually, did feelings come into it at all? To try and get at that, let's look at her ideas of mothering and where they came from. And since mothering gets passed down from generation to generation through a chain of mothers, to get any sense of it, let's step back to my grandmother. The world my grandmother Athena was born into is long gone. She grew up as the only child of an important man in a privileged New York home. Weekly strolls in the park with her doting father in top hat, European tours with steamer trunks and nannies, dinner parties with dignitaries galore. Athena's eccentric mother didn't care a fig about running the household or raising a child. The care of Athena was left to the hired help, an army of nursemaids, nannies, and tutors. So here's my question. With her mother's nose always in a book and her father focused on business, who taught Athena how to love? She grew up with a total sense of certainty of her place in the world, an important person with important things to say, one to be listened to. The love part, I'm not sure it factored in. In due course, she found herself a highly suitable husband who promptly took over the family business, and she moved from daughter of important man to wife of. Having no brothers, she needed a husband who could run the business. Of course, in those days, it never occurred to anyone that maybe she could. While my grandfather was an able, ambitious, and attractive fellow, Athena was always the power behind the throne. For her, love was measured in achievement. Schooling, title, accomplishments. These were the yardsticks of love for her. She didn't raise kids. She raised foot soldiers for democracy. She had high expectations and ample resources, tutors, experimental schools, lessons galore. My grandmother Athena was a remarkable woman, to be sure. The thing is, to my mind, she was a pretty crappy mother. She hated being touched, for one thing, even by her children. No cuddly kisses or warm laps there. Children were to behave or be gone. I think my grandmother was always treated as an adult, even at a very young age. And that's what she expected of her children. She questioned lots of things, but she never questioned how to mother. To her, children were just the larval stages of adults. And the sooner they pupated and started contributing to society, the better. My mother is the second of Athena's 4 children. We won't talk about how 4 children came to be when she hated being touched, but there you are. They were all extraordinarily accomplished, not a slacker among them, chairs of this, leaders of that. But as parents, they were, at least from the perspective of my cousins, siblings, and me, quite damaged goods. Each in their own way, but their common themes: remote, busy, oblivious to the needs of their kids, and perhaps most importantly, oblivious to their own feelings. Not an introspective bone in their bodies. Better not go there, I imagine they'd think, therapy dragons. Whenever I tried to get my mom to talk about anything emotional, I always thought about trying to get a deer to eat out of your hand. Hold very, very still, no sudden moves, and be very, very patient. My mother and her siblings were raised by nursemaids and governesses, just like Athena, carrying on that chain. When their kids needed a human touch, their solution? Outsource it. When my mother or sibs had some event, Parents' Day, school performances, even graduations, my grandmother and grandfather rarely attended. Instead, my grandfather would send an emissary from the company. The treasurer or the VP of this or that would show up and applaud dutifully. When they decided that my uncle, the only son and youngest child, needed a male influence, what did they do? They hired him a father figure to come over twice a week. I remember even when I was a kid visiting my grandparents, one time we had this long flight delay back to Tennessee, and this dour executive from the company was dispatched to take us to Playland until flight time. My memory has him in a suit, grimly riding the roller coaster, hanging on to his hat. Growing up, my mom and her siblings were pigeonholed by their parents. The pretty one, the silly one, the boy. My mother was the homely one, but also the smart one. So the contradiction between her life of luxury and the state of the rest of the world didn't escape her. If my grandmother's world was Downton Abbey, my mother was the daughter who ran away with the chauffeur. My mom was in her early 20s when World War II started, and for her, a perfect chance to break away. She joined the Red Cross. Her duties were mainly to entertain the troops with donuts and coffee and conversation, and she loved it. I have all her letters home. Over those donuts, she met a handsome sergeant from Kentucky with a warm smile and a hot temper who swept her off her feet. They got married against her parents' wishes. Neither Athena nor my grandfather ever did warm up to my dad, although they sucked it up and threw a big splashy wedding. Then they gave my dad a job running a branch of the family business down in Tennessee. This did right for their beloved daughter and got him out of their hair. If I'd been at the wedding and the justice of the peace got to the part where he says, "Speak now or forever hold your peace," I would have been on my feet like a shot. You've got way too much baggage. She's rich, educated, genteel, naive, shy. He's poor, hard-drinking, handsome, bold, and yes, the bad temper was there in spades. And a chip on his shoulder about money didn't help. I give my mom a ton of credit for her courage. She broke away from that amazingly coddled upbringing and moved to the South, where she knew no one and was a stranger to its customs. There she had to invent for herself how to be a wife, a homemaker, and a mother. She'd never even cooked a meal before she got married. After all, who would have taught her? I don't think my grandmother ever made toast. And she ended up loving to cook. But her main focus was the change the world responsibilities her mother had drilled into her. She joined every group in the city and dedicated to rebuilding the theater, planting trees, championing civil rights, and saving the symphony from extinction over and over again. She worked with a fearless and evangelical zeal to improve Chattanooga. Over time, she became quite the legend in town. She really did make things better, and I'm very proud of her for that. My mom also had 4 kids. We were quite the wolf pack, growing up while ducking under the strafe of a bad marriage, and we're still a tight pack today, my brothers and I. In the mothering department, I'm certain my mother truly meant well. She did try. But somehow I felt loved by an amateur. I distinctly remember when I was little, often asking her to read me books, not because I wanted to hear them, but because I thought it would make her feel better as a parent. As the middle child and the only girl, I was a born observer, the family anthropologist. And I watched my mom very closely and saw how she struggled to sort out her roles and learned how to help and support her. I think this may have been my first lesson in mothering, by mothering her. Having grown up as the homely one, my mom was totally at sea about how to do girl stuff. So raising a daughter wasn't easy. She couldn't teach me about fashion, hair, makeup, or any of this because she didn't have a clue herself. My dad, who had quite an eye, bought all her clothes till they divorced. I remember one class photo day at school, my mom had decided to do my hair. So we were struggling through putting in these blasted rollers when her friend stopped by. She watched for a minute. Not good. "Let me help," she said. So quick as a flash, she did the side of my head that my mom hadn't gotten to. And the next day, I had a perfectly coiffed side and the other that looked like it'd been through a Mixmaster. Oddly enough, I love that picture. My mom was determined to shield us from the many perils she'd suffered in her childhood. So she resisted signing us up for lessons or classes. She'd struggled through a forced march of horseback riding, swimming, tennis, and dance. She hated them, so she assumed everyone would. Of course, she never told us she was protecting us. We just thought she knew we'd be bad at these things and didn't want to waste the money. In all her struggles, I'm sure my mom had a nagging feeling that the way she'd been parented wasn't quite right, wasn't enough. She'd never learned to trust her instincts, though, to show her love, to say, I love you, especially when we were little kids. I think she felt there was a danger in loving us too much, a fear we'd go soft. She'd learned in her mother's knee that if we felt secure, we wouldn't strive. We would sit and eat bonbons all day instead of going out and fixing the world. If she pinned up our artwork, attended our games or plays, or praised our accomplishments, we might think they were good enough, that we'd settle for these childish efforts. Sadly, my mother's fears seem to have closed her off from what I think she really felt. That she-bear love, that feeling you'd pay a ransom, cut off your arm, maybe even cut off your head for your kids. My mother wouldn't let herself feel that, ever. Too dangerous. She did manage to remold some of the links in the chain of mothers she came with, and I admire her hugely for that. It's hard forging them yourself. I do think chain is the right word in a lot of ways. So how have I managed this chain I inherited? There may be some lucky few of you out there who had perfect parents and you just copy off their paper. But for the rest of us, I have another image, another metaphor. I picture us all digging out of the bombed out rubble of our childhoods and trying to build our own edifice of parenting from the debris, and scavenging for good bits as we travel our paths. I learned a lot from watching my mom, and my mothering has something she never gave herself permission to do. I took a chance on trusting my feelings. Blinded by emotion? I've always thought that was a funny phrase. More often, emotions actually open our eyes and let us live more fully, don't they? Our kids will have their own rubble to deal with, to be sure. But I'll tell you this, I'll take on any army to save my kids. And I love feeling that way.
So now that their hard work is done, they volunteered to give us a bit of a peek behind the scenes. But before we do that, I want to take just a minute to celebrate. It's a bold thing to come up on stage and tell a story, a personal story, to 180 people sitting in the dark about your life. So let's have one more round of applause for our participants. And while we're at it, Sally told us a few minutes ago a bit of the history of NOP. What she didn't tell us is that she's been part of that history from the very beginning. Sally's one of NOP's founding mothers. About 10 years ago, Dick Rains and Lynn Dolnick and I joined the ranks of coaches. So one more round of applause for those coaches, for Sally and Lynn and Dick. This talkback has two goals. One is to fuss over our storytellers, which is fun, and to hear a little bit more from them. But the other is to encourage any of you who might be tempted to tell a story of your own to think really hard about that. That would be a wonderful thing if you would do it. If you're tempted to tell a story, tell Sally or Dick or me or Lynn, or go to the RAC website and leave a note. We're always in the market, always eager for new storytellers. And if you do that, we'll be able to continue this tradition. So think hard about it. Now what we're going to do, I want to, we'll get to questions. I want to ask one, and then we'll get on to questions from you. So what I'm curious about for your storytellers is, now that you've done this, what advice you would give to someone out there who thinks that maybe they would like to tell a story. And related to that, I'm curious to know if there's anything in the course of your putting together a story that you hadn't expected or that took you by surprise.
I would say that it was such fun to relive an experience from the past. Our walk was 5 years ago, and working with Dick Raines, we were able to have fun with it again. So reliving an experience publicly is terrifying, but otherwise reliving it was really great.
Has anyone else got a thought about what it was like?
Yeah, I mean, I would say just do it. You know, just sit down. It's worth doing just as a way of gathering your thoughts around a subject that you feel is important. And it's easier to do than you would think. You merely just sit down and start typing away, and eventually the story will kind of evolve. And there are wonderful coaches. We had Dick Raines, wonderful coaches that can give you great advice about how to tell a story, how to create a narrative and a thread through the story. So it's great to try. And gosh, I mean, how many things can you just do that are just fun and good for the community? This is one of them.
Teresa, was it fun or was it an ordeal?
No, I would say it was very engaging to kind of have something I wanted to explore and then go through it. And just sort of a little bit of, for the earlier question, one of the things I found really interesting is because of the time limit, you work and work and work to get an economy of language. And what little bits to put in, what bits to take out, what would the group think is interesting. You don't really want to know everything about my 15-hour bus ride, so you can, getting that economy as well as, the narrative arc of the beginning, the middle, of the end, because you don't start there, right? You start with something you want to explore. And it's super fulfilling, really fulfilling.
And I would just add there, I wrote the initial version of this 10 years ago, and it wasn't quite right, and I set it aside and came back to it and said as I came back to it. So don't feel like you have to write it and do it immediately. It will get better over time.
Yeah, and I did it partially. I mean, this is 14 years since I did it the first time. My mother was alive at the time, and I think that was a big piece of what I was doing, is kind of pre-grieving something. But I mainly did it because it terrified me. And Joyce was an amazing coach and taught me so many things. I thought it was a great experience. And if you're ever interested, I mean, this is a hometown crowd. So go for it.
Let's turn to questions from you. Dick Raines has a microphone. If you raise your hand with a question, Dick will scurry over to you, and we'll be able to hear from you.
Can you dim the house lights a little bit? I mean, the
No,
stage
not the house
lights. The stage lights.
No, the house lights up.
The other way.
There you go.
There we go.
Okay.
Yep, just curious about how long the process was preparing the story. So was this over the course of 2 months, 3 months, 4 months? How long did it take?
I started in February, I think.
Yeah, we started in February.
Over the years, we've got a fair bit of a system. By this date, you ought to have an idea, and by that date, you ought to have some rough notion, and by this date, you ought to be quaking in your boots because it's very close. That kind of thing. Any question at all? Questions either about the stories or about the process of putting together a story?
Hi, Lynn. I'm so proud of you. You had me in tears, but also laughing. Your story resonated with me and the torturous relationship I had with my mother. And the question I have is, I recall reading a psychiatrist, a renowned one, saying, if there's 2 gifts you can give your children, it's unconditional love and confidence. And I'm wondering, given that, children that don't have those end up having a lot of trouble in life, including looking for love in all the wrong places, which is what I did before I met Paul. How did you acquire such a wonderful husband and relationship? I look to you and Ed as examples of like the perfect
We welcome
marriage.
more such questions.
So where did you get that sense of confidence and unconditional love that enabled you to be, in my opinion, such a successful, wonderful human being?
You know, it actually is kind of an interesting question. We have a lot of my cousins. I have 13 cousins. There's some train wrecks in there who've done the serial thing. A lot of divorce in my family. But one of the, and I don't know quite how the chemistry is, but one of the flip sides is I glommed onto him like a limpet. I mean, we were living together by freshman year of college. So, and 2 of my brothers the same way. You just, boom, we're done here. This is home. And that's an alternative response.
There's another question over here.
Have we reached the end of our questions?
Oh, here's one.
Oops. One more.
I love your stories. Thank you so much. I'm curious about the transition from the written word to the spoken word. How was it for you? I know this reading a story is different than performing or listening. Did your stories change or your approach change as you left the writing table and approached the stage?
Well, my mentors were Lynn and Ed, and I think you said in speaking, people use 20% of the words they know or something. I'm not sure what the exact percentage is. So yeah, it gets more and more colloquial as you go through it, without a doubt, without a doubt. I think I tried to write it as if I were speaking it, but you do get more colloquial as time goes on. I don't know if you guys found that.
Yeah, because when you're writing, you try to find the right word, and the sentence structure has to be correct. But when you're speaking it, there's so much more communication going on because you have facial expressions. You have a lot hand gestures, I'm half Italian, so that's natural to me. But you do need the roadmap. I don't think it can be done unless you have a written script.
We'd still be talking.
Yeah, you need to keep it short.
Over the years, some people have worried that they couldn't do this because they're not writers. And that's actually not a realistic objection. Hardly anyone is a writer, but nearly everyone is a talker and a storyteller. So you know how to do this far better than you might think. Have we got a wrap-up question, or? Says this should be the last.
Hi, I was really taken by the zebra wildebeest part, and I was wondering if you thought of each other in that way during your walk, or if it came out while you were telling the story.
In our blog, I referred to our relationship as the zebra and the wildebeest. So it was an ongoing discussion. I did look up that it was in fact a reciprocal relationship, so it's accurate that they do travel together and they help each other survive. So it's accurate from that standpoint, but we did use it in our blog regularly.
Okay.
I have a follow-up question for you. Is your blog still live, and where can we read it?
It's, we can, how can we post we can get it out to you if you want. It's still.
Rack could do something with that.
Yeah.
It's a lot of it.
Look on the website.
La Dolce Farnientes,
It's
plural,
ildolcefarniente.com,
plural.
which means the sweet doing nothing.
We can post that.
Except walking.
I believe we've run through our questions, in which case, let's send our storytellers home with one final.